Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. Well, today we're talking marriage. Our guest today is Dr. Corey Allen. He is a family and marriage therapist, has a PhD in family therapy, and he runs the website Simple Marriage. And today we're going to talk about if you're married right now, what you can do to improve your marriage, and if you're thinking about getting married, what you can do today to prepare yourself for the best possible relationship with your future wife. Well, Corey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Brett. I'm glad to be here.
So, Simple Marriage, what's behind the name? Like, what's the philosophy behind the Simple Marriage project?
Well, the main idea is, and is just kind of a personal belief, is that when I can keep things simple, things are better. Because we make things way too complicated a lot of times with piling stuff on and clutter and everything. And so the more simple I can keep it, the more important it stays. And marriage seems to kind of ebb and flow in the world as far as a focus in relationships. And it's a huge deal as far as relationships go. But I want to try to help people see that their marriage is a priority throughout, not just whenever there's a problem. So the Simple Marriage started as a way to try to reach people before there were problems, and it's kind of evolved into a two-pronged approach of there's great resources available for people that just want to improve marriages, and then there's also great resources available that will help address specific issues that come up in any committed relationship.
All right. Well, good stuff. So, I mean, here's a question I have. I know a lot of our listeners and readers, they're in college or they just graduated college. They're not married yet, but they're thinking about it and they're going to be contemplating it. What sort of things should these guys be doing now to prepare for a successful marriage?
Okay. Well, the easiest answer I can think of is to live full and passionate lives that don't change too much upon being married. I mean, relationships always a component of life and of what you do, but there's far too many couples, I think, that give up a whole lot of their life for the sake of the relationship, and then years into the relationship, that when the passion and the spark is gone, then they're like, now what? This is boring. I'm suffocating. And it's because they gave up so much to be in the relationship. So it's kind of that balancing act of live a full and passionate life and let the relationship be a part of it, not a majority of it.
And so how do you tell these guys, how do you manage? That's another thing. How do you manage? And this kind of leads into our next question. How do you manage? You have a way of life. You're passionate about your life. You find someone that you think is the one, but you find out your passions don't align, right? Or like she doesn't like what you do, or you don't like what she does. So, I mean, that's the question. Like, how do you know that, if you're contemplating on asking a woman to marry you, how do you know if she's the one? I know people say like there's no such thing as the one. I don't think there's the one, but how do you know if she's compatible or right for a relationship?
Well, I think I mean, again, everything we do in life is choice. So everything we choose has consequences that come along with it. So if I choose to live a really passionate life that's going to mean I'm going to travel all the time, I'm really likely choosing to have very little relationship with people unless they travel with me. So, but at the same time, if I have somebody I really care about and I'm willing to give up some of those things, it's my choice. They're not forcing me. And so I think it's kind of a personal responsibility approach. I think that I'm living a full and passionate life, and maybe my partner that I'm falling in love with and I'm thinking I want to live my life with, she's not totally on board. Well, that's up for discussion then. Because we evolve and change as we grow and mature. So it still just comes back to marriage is choice and relationships are choice, whether it's day one or day 2051. So compatibility kind of that's a tough issue, because you wouldn't be together if you weren't compatible. I mean, you wouldn't last any length of time if you weren't compatible. But it's the constant changing and evolving of the people involved that takes place. That's probably what trips most people up, is they all of a sudden think, well, we're no longer compatible. Well, yeah, you are. You're just maybe in different places. You got to still kind of work through some things.
Well, I mean, are there other things besides compatibility that you should look in a person when you're deciding whether to get married? I mean, are there attributes in the person that you should look for that are like, yeah, she would she would be good, a person, a good partner, a good life partner, or maybe she's not ready. Maybe she's not the marrying type, or the things like that.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to look out for the people that invest way too much in the relationship. As far as, I mean, if we're going to go stereotypical for your audience, this art of manliness. If you find a woman that has given up everything for you and is just going to be at your beck and call at any time, for a short term, or I've been married almost 20 years now. For a weekend, that sounds great. If my wife was just at my beck and call. But after that, slavery gets really, really old and suffocating. And so you want somebody that can push back at you, challenge you, be a little bit of an effort to keep up with, and is stimulating. And so if you find somebody that's just real clingy and dependent, that's kind of one of those, what kind of life do they have on their own? Because they're going to want to just live their life through me. And then the other is, I think we're probably going to find people, I mean, theory is going to state from my schooling that we meet and fall in love with people that have a similar upbringing in the sense, or a similar family dynamic. And that doesn't mean, I'm from a divorced family, so I have to find somebody from a divorced family. No, it's just there's subtleties in the way we're raised, in the relationships we have, that makes sense. And that's part of what makes it to where we fall in love with those people, because they make sense. If they're too far apart, they don't last. That's those short-term relationships where it's just nothing really clicks.
So here's a good question. You're a marriage counselor, professional marriage counselor. You have your PhD. I mean, you've gone to schooling. What are the biggest problems you've seen that you've learned about in your schooling and from your own practice that marriages have?
Well, the research is going to say that the common issues people fight about and have the most issues over is still money and sex. That's the two main fighting areas. What I see, this is my personal approach, and this is kind of what Simple Marriage brings to the table, is my personal bias is the reason most couples come to see me is because they're actually too close. And they're each fighting for their own space and their own identity, and they don't realize that they're too fused into what they view, their spouse's response to things, or it's the walking on eggshells. I can't ever do anything right. Well, it's all based on how you perceive they're perceiving what's going on, rather than this is what I think, this is who I am, and being solid enough to stand up and say so, and then deal with life as it comes up, and pushback from a spouse as it comes up, because we all have different ways of viewing things, and just gender alone adds all kinds of fire there on differences, because a woman's going to view things drastically different than a man does.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So I guess that's called differentiation. Is that what it's called in the?
That's the psychobabble term that I believe in, and it was started from a theorist named Murray Bowen years ago when he was looking at the family system and how we differentiate through the generations, and then it's been adopted and applied slightly differently in a marriage context, but it's the same foundation. Yeah. And I term it as growing up. I mean, that's just the way I think of it. Is marriage is designed, I believe, to help us grow up. It's not designed for our happiness. It's not designed for joy and pleasure. We get that, but the main point of marriage is to help us be better people.
Awesome. And you were mentioning you referred to something in your answer that people need to learn how to stand up for themselves. So it sounds like assertiveness is an important skill to develop in order to have a successful marriage.
Well, I think that's a lifelong thing, because anytime my wants and desires impact people I care about, I'm at that crucible, if you will, of do I speak up and go for what I want, even though it may hurt them, or do I give in and don't ever say it because I just don't want to create any waves? And that's that constant, two-choice dilemma, if you will, I guess, that I want to go out with the guys on the weekend, but I know my wife's going to want to spend some time with me. Well, what do I do? What do I choose? And I think that's a simplistic thought, but it's a whole lot deeper when it really plays out.
Definitely. So, okay, let's talk about that. You referred to the differences between genders on how they approach marriage. What are some of those differences on how men and women approach marriage? Well,
I mean, that's a deep, tough question.
I'm going to get you in trouble.
I appreciate that. I really think that marriage, we're born into this idea of relationships. That's where we are. That's where we come from. Obviously, is a relationship between a man and a woman. If you just go biological, relationship between a sperm and an egg, and so we're designed for relationships. I think that's where things are magnified. That's where things are improved. That's where, if you get to experience something and you experience it with someone else, it's so much more. There's so much more depth and greater in greatness associated with it. But so fundamentally, I think there's a similarity in men and women in that we both are seeking appreciation and acceptance and a companionship, and we don't want to be alone in this journey of life together. Stereotypically, men are looking for a sex partner. I think that's a huge component. If you go just stereotypically, women are looking for stability and security. If you go very stereotypically, and so they want someone that'll help provide and protect. And if you just go back all the way through the generations, that's kind of how our ancestors were when they roamed and had to hunt and gather and nest and all the different things that started. That hasn't changed too much today. Men still go out and have more of a tendency for that hunt and kill and provide, and women still have more of a tendency for that nest and nurture and create some comfort. And so not much has changed. We just have how it's done has changed.
Are there things that men do or maybe not do? I mean, I'm talking generalities here, but that
right. I think this whole conversation is going to have to be cased in the whole footnote of this is all generalities.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone's different. Different.
There's always going to be exceptions to this. Yeah. But I think fundamentally there's going to be similarities for what we're talking about.
Sure. So, but I mean, with that caveat are there things that men that you've seen in your practice that men generally do or don't do that hurt or help the marriage?
Yeah, the biggest thing I've seen, and this is from my own life too, is there are far too many nice guys out there that they have forgotten their alpha, if you will. That not that they're the lord of the house and head of I believe they're head of the household. That's a spiritual concept that I hold dear, but it's still one of those that there's so much more to being kind of a full grown man as opposed to a guy that tiptoes around and tries to just make his wife happy. I mean, that adage, I know, I've known you for a while, Brett, so I know you've had an interview with Dr. Robert Glover at one point with one of your podcasts, and he kind of, I don't know, coined the phrase nice guy, but helped kind of uncover it quite a bit. And, I think that's one of the big things that men struggle with is this whole, they kind of have lost their identity for the sake of their family and their wife. And then she's sitting there looking to him to get some sort of a course or direction for life as a whole. Because I think women want to be called up into a story that's bigger than themselves. And so if he's not providing that, then she's going to sit there and be, unknowingly angry as to why. And that's a fuel for a lot of frustration when sometimes if the king will just show up and take charge or the captain his ship, everything kind of falls right in line.
So what do you tell those kind of guys? I mean, what do you tell these guys to start doing that you see these kind of nice guys? I mean, how do they get out of that or kind of kick the nice guy syndrome to the curb?
Well, I think it's a long process. I mean, it's one I've been going through for a while because I was a classic nice guy for the first part of my marriage, for sure. So a lot of it is just this whole, looking at what the attachments to outcomes they have, what are they really trying to get and get more in line with how could I really get that in a more authentic, grown up way rather than manipulate it. I mean, think of it this way. The idea of, a man, I could have a fight with my wife over something because maybe I did something wrong. And I didn't get reservations for some trip that we had planned. And I procrastinated. And then when I finally called up to try to get them, the hotel or the resort was booked. And so I come up with this little subtle, there was a convention and, that's my way out. So I'm not the bad guy then. But then so we have a little fight because she's disappointed, but I'll then try to soothe her because I'm thinking if she's not in a good mood, there's no chance we're having sex tonight. So I have to figure out how. So it's all this manipulation and covert contract kind of stuff. And so the best way to kick a nice guy to the curb in the sense of in your own life is just be brutally honest. Just start confronting things head on and just saying what you think. And it's not a personal attack. It's just what you think. And then you just start seeing what happens as she responds, and then you respond. And through it all, I think we both grow.
Yeah, I imagine it's a process that goes both ways, because I'm sure relationships where like the guy's like the nice guy walks on eggshells, he's probably conditioned his wife in a lot of ways to like respond to that. And so when the guy finally steps up and like, says what he thinks, there's probably some pushback, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And that's, and I've heard this, this case and the whole concept of a captain and a first officer mantra. And I think that fits pretty well, because at the end of the day, if something major goes wrong, if someone broke into my home, and all four of my families here, I have two little kids and then my wife and I, it's really on me to be the first responder to deal with that. It's not my wife's responsibility. She's not bigger than me. She's not stronger than me. That's kind of that's my role. But if I'm not here, it's hers. She assumes that responsibility. And I think lots of marriages and lots of women I've talked to really like this idea of, they like being kind of a first officer where they're not in charge of everything, but they have a say in everything.
Sure. That's an interesting concept. So what are some things that a guy can do now? If there's a man who's married, what are some little things that he can do now to improve or strengthen that marriage? And I think we've mentioned one. If you're a nice guy, quit being the nice guy, assert yourself. You don't have to be a jerk about it. A lot of people think in order to be assertive, you got to be a jerk. No, you just got to stand up for yourself, say what you think.
Right. Just speak up.
Yeah. But besides that, what are some other things that guys can do to improve their marriage?
Well, I think, one we've also alluded to is just up your own honesty. And this starts with the honesty to yourself, where you kind of own your own stuff and you own your own mistakes. But then you also start be honest about what you think, what's going on in your life and in your family and in your relationship. And the other is just, along the lines of speaking up for what you want, rather than a classic nice guy is, hey, let's go to dinner. Oh, okay. She'll, well, where do you want to go? And, you don't have a plan at all. And, my wife hates that, because she works in a very high stress corporate world. And when she comes home, she doesn't want to keep making decisions. She's been doing that all day. She wants me, if I ask her to dinner, I need to have a plan. I got to have it all set out. And if she doesn't like it, she'll speak up and say so, and I can adjust and if I want, or then we just navigate if it occurs. So have a plan. And then the other I think of is just keep pursuing your wife, keep pursuing your woman, if you will, to let her know the role she is to you in your life, the importance that she is in your life, that she's not just your wife. She's not just your kids' moms. She's your lover. She's a friend. She's a companion. She's exotic and erotic and all these different components of her. Well, keep pursuing that, because it's a never ending kind of quest to learn her more. For sure.
Is there any like common advice, like, common marital advice that, you see like on Oprah or like you read in Cosmo or whatever that actually does more harm than good?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to step in it here. I think there's a lot of the stuff that's out there in the marriage world is Band-Aid solutions. Some of the bigger named ones are the his needs, her needs, the love languages, those things. On base value, they're good. But if I start to try to do different things to accommodate to my wife's needs at the detriment of my own needs, I'm just creating fusion again. I'm not standing up for me. I'm just catering to her. And that's the balancing act. So I think a lot of the stuff that's out there of, well, you just need to learn how to listen better. You just need, there's a big one, Brett. There's so many couples come in and say, we have trouble communicating. I mean, that's just a common. I imagine you've been married a while. You probably have fallen victim to that thought too. We just don't understand each other. Well, my question to anybody that brings that up is, really, So when they say something, do you get upset? Well, yeah. Well, then you're communicating just fine because you're understanding it. And if you didn't communicate well, you wouldn't get pissed off. So it's more about I don't like when another person I really care about has something to say that I don't like or I can't handle. So I can't handle the message. So those communication training things are great, but when emotions get charged, we usually just chuck that right out the window, all that learning, and we just react. So most of the stuff that I've seen is real subtle fusion building, which in the long run I think harms marriages more than anything.
Oh, that's a really.
So there I stepped in.
Yeah, you totally stepped in it, man. You're gonna get like lots of comments on your blog saying you're giving bad advice.
I might just do that, but that's all right. Maybe it's a way to present a different way to look at things. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of times where like, yeah, I'll hear my wife and I just don't like what she's saying. It's like I think a lot of people have a hard time, dealing with that, right? I think that you really hit on something. Like, yeah, this person.
Right. I mean, we all have a hard time. Yeah, we all have a hard time dealing with people that don't agree with us.
Yeah, but especially when you think that person should be on. That happens with my wife and I a lot. Like a lot of times we assume, like the other knows what the other's thinking. Like,
oh yeah,
you're like, oh, of course
thought we were in this together.
yeah, or like, oh, we're so alike. Of course you were supposed to think that. Or like that's what happens to me a lot. Like I won't do something or say something because I thought my wife had already done or taken care of that. But the thing was I was thinking that myself. So I was like, oh yeah, of course it got done.
Right.
There's one of my foibles. So let's talk about this. You mentioned it a little bit about growing up in marriage, and you talk a lot about that in your books and on your blog. What do you mean by that, growing up in marriage?
Well, I think it's, it could be phrased, the psychobabble term we alluded to earlier is called differentiation, which is just a better way. Well, let me phrase it all this way. This is a little convoluted, but maybe I can make it pretty simple. There's two different processes I think that are going on in every relationship. One is an internal, which is our thinking and our feeling. Some people are more thinkers, some people are more feelers. Learning how to grow up is allowing you to be able to use both to your benefit rather than be dominated by one. Because lots of times when we get upset about something, we'll retreat into our brain and just analyze it, or we just become this emotional eruption and we just react and then we just pick up the pieces later. At the same time, on an external, in a systems world, there's this togetherness and separateness where we want to be together with people and all that provides, but we also still want to be our own person. Growing up allows you to fluidly fluctuate back and forth between those and not be dominated by either, where you're constantly seeking togetherness or constantly seeking separateness. You're kind of recognizing that more in yourself. And so to me, growing up is just better being able to handle life on life's terms and not be dominated by any of it, but choose what we want.
That's great advice. One thing I've learned about marriage, I've been married, I think it's coming up on 8 years. I feel like a lot of young people avoid marriage because they feel like they have to have it figured out before they go into it. Like they have to know exactly like how to have a solid relationship. But like honestly, you kind of learn. It's like on the job training. I feel like
that's exactly what it is. Nothing prepares you for marriage but marriage.
Exactly.
I mean, you can do, and I really do encourage people to do some premarital stuff. Go through the Prepare and Rich, which is a great inventory. Find a counselor or a pastor in your area that's trained, because what that'll do is point out the big areas that you're going to have problems with. But you're going to have problems with everybody. It doesn't matter who is you made the comment of the soulmate. Yeah, you still have hurdles.
Yeah.
At some point. And so you can at least know going in, okay, these are the issues we're going to be fighting about 10 years from now. Okay. I'm cool with that. And then maybe there's some tools I can do to lessen it a little bit, but you really don't get prepared for marriage till you're into it.
Yeah. And I also like the idea of like growing up in marriage. I really feel like marriage has helped me grow up because you're, like you mentioned, it forces you to like quit thinking about yourself only. You have to start thinking about, okay, there's a world beyond myself, right? Like the psychobabble, right? That toddlers and children, they have like this huge ego, right? The world revolves around them, but like marriage really does sort of like bash you on the side of the head. Like, no, there's something else besides you.
Right. And there's great things that come from it, but you have to learn how to still be you and choose and go after that, knowing you can't necessarily control it, but you can present something that's more likely to get chosen. And it's ongoing. We could talk about this for a long, long time, I think, but it is marriage is just designed to help us be better.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right, so Corey, I know there's probably some guys out there who might be married and are having some troubles with their marriage. At what point should a couple consider therapy? Is there like is there like a moment that happens in the relationship, like, yeah, immediately you should go therapy? Or, I mean, how do you know if that's right for you?
Well, I'm very biased for therapy. I think everybody benefits from therapy because we're all born in families and every family is dysfunctional. So we all get benefit from learning how to deal with life a little better. Research shows that most couples still wait 6 years from when a problem has become a problem before they go to therapy. And by then, most of the couples that I see that have waited that long, I'm doing a whole lot more divorce kind of work than I am marriage work. And that's really frustrating because one person's already checked out and there's really nothing I can do at that point. So, anytime there's a problem, I would recommend first and foremost, open up to somebody of the same gender. So guys open up to another guy. You don't share misery with another woman. That's just a slippery slope to, oh, well, she understands me so much better. No, she doesn't. She just doesn't know you as well yet. So open up, because what you find, I think, I don't know if you've had this experience, Brett, but I know when I've had the courage to speak up to a friend about something that's been going on in my marriage, lo and behold, it's going on in theirs too, or they've been there before, or, so it's like you realize I'm not alone in this. There's other people that understand. And so from that kind of a counsel, you can then, you probably need to go see somebody. So if you have any kind of an addiction thing, that's a big flag for professional help is good. Any kind of an affair, emotional, physical, or otherwise, that's good to get help from somebody that can be objective and in favor of the relationship. And then the other is just kind of, you got to just trust your gut, And then I would also say this to the guys, and I know some women follow along and listen to this too, but if you want to go to therapy and your spouse or your significant other doesn't, then go on your own. You can change the system by just changing you. You don't have to both be there.
Well, very good stuff. Well, Corey, this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
Our guest today was Dr. Corey Allen. Corey is a marriage and family therapist, and he blogs at simplemarriage.net. That wraps up another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. For more manly tips and advice, make sure to check out the Art of Manliness website at artofmanliness.com. And until next time, stay manly.